Hello, my name is Mike, and I'm a taxi driver in Savannah, Georgia. This city, with its old-world charm and its maze of cobblestone streets, has been my workplace for over a decade. Each corner of Savannah is steeped in history, some delightful and some, as I found out one stormy night, downright eerie. It was a typical October evening when I started my shift. The weather forecast had warned of heavy rain, and by nightfall, the skies opened up as promised. Rain hammered down relentlessly, creating a symphony of rhythmic beats on the roof of my taxi and turning the streets into reflective rivers of light under the street lamps. I was cruising down Abercorn Street, one of Savannah's main arteries, framed by ancient oaks and historic homes, their windows glowing warmly in the night. Despite the weather, the beauty of the rain-drenched city was not lost on me. However, as I approached the intersection of Abercorn and 37th, a sudden chill cut through the warmth of my car, a chill that seemed out of place even on a cold, rainy night. As I neared this particular crossroads, known for its blend of architectural beauty and urban lore, the atmosphere shifted palpably. The rain seemed to fall even harder, and a dense fog began to curl up from the ground, slithering around the wheels of my taxi like something alive. This part of town was quieter, the usually bustling streets now deserted, giving the area a desolate, almost haunted feel. That's when I first heard it, a scream. It wasn't just any scream, it was a sharp, piercing shriek that cut through the noise of the rain and caused me to slam on the brakes. I scanned the area, peering out into the night through my rain-soaked windshield, but the streets were empty. No pedestrians, no cars, nothing that could explain the source of such a terrifying sound. Heart racing, I rolled down my window to listen more closely, rain spattering my face as I strained my ears. The scream came again, louder and more desperate this time, as if someone were in grave distress. It seemed to emanate directly from the crossroads ahead. Puzzled and increasingly unnerved, I drove the taxi slowly towards the source, the beams of my headlights cutting through the fog and rain, revealing little but the slick black asphalt and the glistening cobblestones of the intersection. I stopped right at the crossroads, the sense of dread in my stomach growing as the engine idled in the quiet, save for the patter of rain. Gathering my courage, I opened the door and stepped out into the storm. The rain had soaked through my jacket in seconds, the cold seeping into my bones as I called out into the night, "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice seemed muffled by the thick curtain of rain, and no reply came back, just the echo of my own words against the surrounding buildings. Determined to find the source of the cries, or at least confirm that no one was in danger, I fetched my flashlight from the glove compartment and began a more thorough search. The beam of light sliced through the darkness, casting eerie shadows as it moved. I checked behind bushes, under the benches of the nearby bus stop, and even the doorways of the closed shops, but found nothing. No one was there, no trace of any disturbance, just the relentless rain and an unsettling feeling that I was not alone. As I turned back towards my taxi, the screams ceased abruptly, replaced by the oppressive silence of the night. Shivering, not just from the cold but from the creeping realization of the situation's strangeness, I hurried back to the safety of my cab. As I pulled away from the crossroads, a glance in my rearview mirror revealed nothing but the empty rain-soaked streets behind me, the fog now settling back down as if nothing had happened. Little did I know, the night was far from over, and the true nature of these screams was yet to be revealed. With the haunting silence now enveloping the car, I drove away from the crossroads, my mind swirling with confusion and a creeping sense of dread. The streets of Savannah, usually so welcoming with their historical charm, now seemed to whisper secrets in the shadows cast by the flickering streetlights. The rain continued to fall, each drop a reminder of the scream that had pierced the night just moments before. As I tried to make sense of what had happened, a part of me wanted to dismiss it as the wind, or perhaps a trick of the mind, common enough for anyone driving alone on such a stormy night. But the clarity of those screams was undeniable. They had been too visceral, too fraught with real terror to be anything but genuine. Determined to find some logical explanation, I circled back, driving slowly past the crossroads again. The area was as desolate as before, the only movement coming from the torrential rain that seemed to wash the last remnants of the incident into the storm drains. Pulling over, I sat staring at the intersection, half expecting the screams to start again, but there was only silence. After a few minutes, I reluctantly decided to continue with my shift. Perhaps it was just a prank, I reasoned, or maybe the echo of a party somewhere, distorted by the weather and the empty streets. Trying to put the episode behind me, I picked up a few more fares, the normalcy of their conversation helping to dispel the eerie tension from earlier. But as the night wore on, the unease returned. Each time I passed a quiet street or another dimly lit crossroads, the memory of the scream echoed in my mind. It was during one of these reflective moments that I decided to take a break and pulled into a 24-hour diner for some coffee. Sitting at the counter, sipping the hot brew, I struck up a conversation with the waitress, a longtime resident who knew Savannah like the back of her hand. On a whim, I mentioned the strange incident at the crossroads. To my surprise, her face turned pale, and she leaned in closer. "You heard the scream," she whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. "You're not the first. That crossroads, there's stories about it. Old stories of a tragedy that happened there years ago. They say on stormy nights, you can hear the screams of a woman who died in an accident. They never caught the driver who hit her, it was a hit and run." Chilled by her words, I pressed her for more details. She told me that the woman had been young, in her 20s, and that night had been as stormy as this one. "Some folks say her spirit can't rest, not until there's some kind of justice or recognition of her fate," the waitress added, glancing nervously towards the window as the wind howled outside. Her story struck a nerve, and I felt a sudden responsibility, a need to return to the crossroads. I left the diner and drove back, the streets now eerily quiet as the city slept under the shroud of the storm. Parking near the intersection, I turned off the engine and listened. For a long time, there was nothing but the sound of rain on the roof of the cab. But then, just as I was about to start the car and leave, I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of a woman's scream, filled with pain and fear. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my flashlight and ran towards the sound, determined to find its source or at least confront this ghostly presence. As I reached the center of the crossroads, the air turned icy cold, and the rain around me seemed to pause momentarily. "Who are you? What do you want?" I shouted into the darkness, my voice bold despite the trembling fear I felt. There was a long silence, then a soft, almost inaudible whisper, "Help me." The temperature seemed to drop several more degrees, and I felt a presence there by the crossroad. "Hello, my name is Carl. For over 15 years, I've driven a taxi through the vibrant and unpredictable streets of Pittsburgh. I've seen just about everything you can imagine, from heartwarming encounters to the downright bizarre. But there was one rainy October night that stands out in my mind, a night that ventured beyond the boundaries of the ordinary and touched the edge of the inexplicable. It was a typical late fall evening, the kind where the chill seeps into your bones and the rain seems to fall with a relentless, drumming persistence. The streets were slick with water, reflecting the city lights in a shimmering tableau of urban life. I was navigating through the South Side, which at this hour was mostly quiet, save for the occasional splash of a car driving too fast through a puddle. Around midnight, I found myself waiting for a fare near East Carson Street, the rain pounding on the roof of my cab like an incessant knock. To pass the time, I decided to turn on the radio, hoping for some classic rock to keep me company. However, the radio seemed to have other plans. At first, it was just static, a common annoyance during storms as the signals get disrupted. But as I fiddled with the dial, trying to find a clear station, something unusual happened. Amid the static, I began to hear whispers. It was faint, almost like a distant conversation being carried over the airwaves unintentionally. I paused, my hand on the dial, straining to make out the words. "Turn back," the voice said, cutting through the noise with unexpected clarity. I glanced around, half expecting to see a practical joker hiding in the back seat, but I was utterly alone. Thinking it was just a fluke, I shook my head and continued scanning through the stations. But no matter where I tuned, the voice followed, growing more insistent with each turn of the dial. "Turn back, go home," it repeated, now clearly addressing me. The specificity of the message, the directness of it, sent a shiver down my spine. Unnerved but skeptical, I tried to dismiss it as interference from some amateur radio operator or a quirk of the stormy weather. Yet, The voice had a quality to it that felt all too human, too intentional. It wasn't merely broadcasting, it was communicating. With a sigh, I decided to engage with this mystery voice, partly out of irritation and partly driven by a growing curiosity. "Who is this?" I asked aloud, not really expecting a response. The static on the radio paused, and in a clearer, almost serene voice it answered, "A friend." Listen closely. The rain intensified, as if punctuating the gravity of the moment. The voice continued, "Accident ahead, turn at Murray Avenue." The mention of a specific street, one that was coming up at the next set of lights, jarred me. This wasn't just random interference, it was a directed message, a warning. Still skeptical but now too intrigued to ignore the advice, I decided to follow the instruction. As I signaled and turned onto Murray Avenue, the voice added, "Be careful, Carl." It knew my name. That detail alone was enough to convince me that whatever was happening was far from ordinary. It was as though something from beyond the normal realm of understanding had taken a keen interest in my fate that night. As I continued down Murray Avenue, the atmosphere in the cab shifted. The air felt heavier, charged with an unseen energy. The rain blurred the world outside into a watery canvas, distorting lights and shadows into ghostly shapes. My heart raced, not just from the eerie turn of events, but from a creeping sense of anticipation and fear of what might lie ahead on this unusual night. The normal sounds of the city were drowned out by the pounding rain, leaving me enveloped in a cocoon of my thoughts and the mysterious guiding voice on the radio. As I cautiously navigated down Murray Avenue, the mysterious voice from the radio remained silent. The only sounds were the relentless rain pounding against the taxi and the hum of the engine as I drove through the deserted Pittsburgh streets. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was this a prank? A technical glitch? Or was something genuinely supernatural occurring? Every shadow cast by the streetlights seemed to move, and every gust of wind felt like a whisper in my ear. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, half expecting to see a ghostly figure appear in my headlights. But there was nothing, only the rain-soaked streets and the occasional flicker of a neon sign in the distance. Then, as I approached the intersection with Forbes Avenue, the voice suddenly returned, its tone urgent. "Slow down now," it commanded. Without hesitation, I obeyed, reducing my speed to a near crawl as I approached the traffic light. The light was green, but I felt compelled to stop, the voice's warning echoing in my mind. As I halted at the intersection, a rush of adrenaline surged through me. I scanned the area, expecting to see the aftermath of an accident or some visible danger. But there was nothing, just the empty, wet roads. Then, in an instant, the reason for the warning became terrifyingly clear. From a side street, a large delivery truck barreled into the intersection, its brakes screeching futilely against the slick pavement. It ran the red light, crossing mere feet in front of my stationary cab. If I hadn't stopped, if I hadn't listened to the mysterious voice, I would have been directly in the truck's path. Shaken by the near miss, I sat there for a moment, my heart pounding, rain streaming down the windshield. The voice spoke again, softer this time, "You're safe now, Carl." "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The reply was a simple, "A guardian," before the radio returned to static, the voice disappearing as quickly as it had arrived. The rest of the night was a blur. I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to process the evening's events. The logical part of my mind searched for explanations, but nothing fit. It wasn't until I finally pulled over and turned off the engine that I allowed myself to really think about what had happened. I sat there, looking out at the city that was slowly calming from the storm. The rain was easing, and the early hours of the morning brought a sense of peace that was in stark contrast to the night's earlier chaos. Reflecting on the voice, I felt a profound sense of gratitude mixed with bewilderment. Had something beyond my understanding intervened to save my life? The next day, I researched local radio frequencies, even called a few stations to see if they had experienced any unusual transmissions. Nothing came up. I spoke to other drivers, to anyone who might listen and perhaps believe my story. But no one had heard such a thing, and no explanation came to light. Over time, the intensity of that night began to fade, but the impact of it did not. I continued my shifts, driving the same streets, always half expecting the voice to return. But it never did. The experience left me with a deep-seated feeling that we're not always as alone as we might think, that perhaps in moments of great peril, something out there might just be looking out for us. Now, when I pass by that same intersection on Murray Avenue, I can't help but slow down, a habit born not out of fear. Hello, my name is Tom, and I've been navigating the often unpredictable roads of Richmond, Virginia as a taxi driver for over 2 decades. This job has taken me down nearly every street and alley of this historic city and introduced me to a wide array of characters, from the everyday commuter to the occasional oddball. Yet, none of these encounters left a mark quite like the mysterious passenger I picked up one stormy October night. The evening started uneventfully, with the usual fare of late-night revelers and last-minute errands. However, as midnight approached, the weather took a turn for the worse. A heavy rain began to fall, drumming against the windows of my cab with increasing intensity, while gusts of wind tugged at the trees lining the streets, causing their shadows to dance wildly in the headlights' beam. I was about to call it a night and head home when a call came through for a pickup from a local bar known for its live music and lively crowd. The place was winding down when I arrived, and the streets were nearly deserted. That's when I saw him, an enigmatic figure standing alone under the dim light of the bar's overhanging roof, large umbrella in hand, shielding him from the relentless downpour. As he slid into the back seat, a chill ran down my spine, not from the cold, but from the sudden change in the air. It was as if his presence brought a palpable shift in atmosphere. 2210 Willow Creek Road, please, he said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent that suggested urgency. I noticed then that his clothes were remarkably dry, untouched by the rain, which was odd considering the weather. The address he gave was unfamiliar to me, not a place typical for my late-night fares. It was located on the outskirts of town, an area less traveled and more isolated. As we drove, I attempted to make small talk to dispel the heavy silence that had settled inside the cab. He offered little in response, only nodding or offering a monosyllabic reply. His attention seemed fixated on the passing scenery, as if he were searching for something or someone in the rain-blurred darkness. The drive was long, and the further we went, the more the urban landscape gave way to less familiar rural surroundings. Old, gnarled trees lined the roads, their branches swaying ominously in the wind, and the sparse streetlights did little to penetrate the darkness that enveloped us. Every so often, lightning would illuminate the sky, revealing abandoned fields and dilapidated structures that added to the night's eerie quality. As we approached the destination, the GPS led us down a narrow, winding road that seemed to be barely holding on against the encroaching wilderness. The address, 2210 Willow Creek Road, was supposed to be just ahead, but as we arrived, my confusion and unease grew. The house before us was clearly abandoned, windows boarded up, garden overtaken by wild growth, and the gate barely hanging on its hinges. "This can't be the right place," I muttered, more to myself than to him. But when I turned to seek confirmation or a new direction for my passenger, I was met with an empty seat. The back of my cab was vacant, with no sign of the man who had been there just moments ago. No door had been opened, no sound had been made. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. Stepping out into the pouring rain, I called out into the night, hoping maybe he'd stepped outside for some reason. But there was no reply, just the sound of the storm and the eerie creaking of the old house's sign swaying in the wind. As I stood there, drenched and bewildered, I realized that this fare was unlike any other I had encountered in my years of driving. The realization sent a shiver through me, not from the cold rain soaking through my clothes, but from the chilling mystery of the passenger who never existed. Staring at the dilapidated house before me, I grappled with the reality of my passenger's inexplicable disappearance. The chill of the night seeped deeper into my bones as I considered the possibilities. Had he slipped away while my attention was fixed on the road? The logic in me found this hard to believe. The doors had remained locked, and I hadn't heard a sound. Compelled by a mix of fear and curiosity, I approached the abandoned house at 2210 Willow Creek Road. The gate creaked ominously as I pushed it open, and the overgrown path crunched under my feet. Each step seemed to stir the silence surrounding the property, and the house loomed larger and more menacing as I drew closer. The front door was slightly ajar, inviting yet foreboding. I pushed it open with the back of my hand, half expecting to find someone, or something, waiting inside. The door groaned on its hinges, echoing through the hollow emptiness of the house. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the scent of mold and decay. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper, a staircase covered in dust and debris, and old furniture draped in tattered cloths. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" My voice felt small and swallowed by the vast emptiness. No response came, just the sound of my own breathing and the distant rumble of thunder. The house felt suspended in time, as if it had been waiting for years, untouched and forgotten, yet there was an inexplicable freshness to the air that hinted at recent presence. Venturing further, I explored the ground floor, my flashlight revealing layers of dust undisturbed except for a set of faint footprints that could have been left days, or even hours ago. They led to the kitchen, where a calendar on the wall was stuck on a page from 10 years ago, and dirty dishes still sat on a counter beside a rusted, empty tin can. The silence was oppressive, magnified by the soft patter of rain leaking through holes in the roof. As I turned to leave the kitchen, a sudden gust of wind swept through the house, sending papers flying and a chill down my spine. It was then that I noticed a small faded photograph on the floor, a picture of what the house might have once been, vibrant, filled with life, a family standing proudly on the front porch. Curiosity urged me to ascend the creaky stairs to the second floor, where the air grew colder and the feeling of abandonment more pronounced. The rooms were empty shells, save for one at the end of the hallway. The door was closed, and as I approached, a sense of dread settled over me. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open. Inside, the room was remarkably preserved compared to the rest of the house. A bed with a dusty quilt, a desk with scattered papers, and a bookshelf filled with old leather-bound books. It was a stark contrast to the decay elsewhere. On the desk, a journal lay open, the ink faded but still legible. It belonged to someone who had lived here, who had loved this house. The last entry was dated the day before the house was reportedly abandoned. It spoke of leaving, of sorrow, and of hoping to return one day. As I stood there absorbing the words, the air shifted, and the faint sound of a car engine drifted up from the road. Rushing to the window, I half expected to see my mysterious passenger, but there was nothing, just the empty, wet road reflecting the occasional flash of lightning. The experience left me unnerved and puzzled. I left the house, locking the mystery behind me as I returned to my taxi. The drive back to the city was quiet, the rain had stopped, and the roads were empty. The night's events played over in my mind, each detail sharp and haunting. Who was the passenger? Why had he led me here? And how had he vanished so completely? These questions remained unanswered as I continued my nightly routes, but the memory of that house and the ghostly passenger who never existed lingered long after, a phantom fare that haunted the edges of my thoughts.